The year was 1884. 21-year-old Narendranath Datta had lost his father just a few months ago, and his family was now bankrupt. Young Naren was dying of starvation and would go from one office to the other in search of employment and be refused everywhere he went. Finally, he wondered why, since Kali, the Divine Mother, listened to his Guru Sri Ramakrishna's prayers, why should not Ramakrishna pray to her to relieve Naren's poverty? But Ramakrishna instead replied, "My boy, I can't make such demands. But why don't you go and ask the mother yourself? All your sufferings are due to your disregard of her." According to Swami Nikhilananda's biography of Swami Vivekananda, this is what then took place. At 9 o'clock in the evening, Narendranath went to the Kali temple. Passing through the courtyard, he felt within himself a surge of emotion, and his heart leapt with joy in anticipation of the vision of the Divine Mother. Entering the temple, he cast his eyes upon the image and found the stone figure to be nothing else but the living goddess, the Divine Mother herself, ready to give him any boon he wanted. Either a happy worldly life or the joy of spiritual freedom. He prayed for the boon of wisdom, renunciation, and her uninterrupted vision, but forgot to ask the goddess for money. He felt great peace within as he left the temple, and when asked later if he had prayed for money, he was startled. He said that he had forgotten all about it. The same thing happened 2 more times. Finally, Naren realized that this incident had given him a great understanding of hidden spiritual realities. As Swami Nikhilananda writes, Narendra's idea of God had hitherto been confined either to that of a vague, impersonal reality or to that of an extra-cosmic creator removed from the world. He now realized that the Godhead is immanent in the creation, that after projecting the universe from within itself, it has entered into all created entities as life and consciousness, whether manifest or latent. This same immanent spirit or the world soul, when regarded as a person creating, preserving, and destroying the universe, is called the personal God and is worshipped by religions through such a relationship as that of father, mother, king, or beloved. These relations, he came to understand, have their appropriate symbols, and Kali is one of them. The next day, Ramakrishna joyfully recounted this incident to his other devotees and said, "Naren would not accept the Divine Mother before, but did so yesterday. Isn't it wonderful that Naren has accepted Mother?" And so, Naren finally realized the importance of the personal goddess Kali. But how did Naren, who later became the great monk Swami Vivekananda, keep this lesson of his master in his mind? How did he, despite his preaching of the intellectual path of liberation or Gyan Yoga, always retain a soft spot in his heart for the path of devotion or Bhakti Yoga? In this video, we will discuss the hidden devotion of Swami Vivekananda using multiple examples from the story of his life. Typically, scholars have argued that Vivekananda simply gave a modern ethical twist to the 8th century Adi Shankaracharya's philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. Recently, however, Swami Medhananda, an academic philosopher as well as a monk of the Ramakrishna Order, has argued against this interpretation. In his book, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism, Medhananda has demonstrated the extent to which Vivekananda's philosophy was, in fact, based on the teachings of his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna. And so, Medhananda argues that while Vivekananda initially leaned towards the world-rejecting outlook of traditional Advaita Vedanta, he eventually came to embrace an integral Advaita, a non-sectarian, life-affirming Advaita philosophy championed by Ramakrishna. This is the same Integral Advaita which would later form the philosophical beliefs of the Indian mystic and poet Sri Aurobindo. Later in this video, we will discuss the ways in which Sri Ramakrishna taught many spiritual secrets to Swami Vivekananda in the form of Vijnana Vedanta. Medhananda provides 4 points to explain the Integral Advaita philosophy and how that differs from the traditional Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankaracharya. In contrast to Shankaracharya, Vivekananda and Ramakrishna held that the impersonal Brahman and the personal Shakti, represented by the goddess Kali, are equally real aspects of one and the same infinite divine reality. The universe is a real manifestation of Shakti. Since we are all living manifestations of God, we should make Vedanta practical by loving and serving human beings in a spirit of worship. Each of the 4 yogas, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raj Yoga, is a direct and independent path to salvation. To make his arguments, Medhananda traces the intellectual development of Vivekananda over his lifetime. In his teenage years, Vivekananda was, in his own words, swept up in the surging tide of agnosticism and materialism and became skeptical of the very existence of God. It seemed for a time as if I must give up all hope of religion, he remarked in hindsight. But all of this changed in the early 1880s, when he met his guru, Sri Ramakrishna. In an 1896 lecture, Vivekananda remarked about his first impressions of his guru as follows. For the first time, I found a man who dared to say that he saw God, that religion was a reality to be felt, to be sensed in an infinitely more intense way than we can sense the world. Ramakrishna trained and guided Vivekananda, both spiritually and intellectually, from 1882 to 1886. But what about the period of agnosticism before meeting his guru? How did the young Naren's spiritual beliefs develop in the absence of his future guru? As a teenager in the late 1870s, Narendra felt drawn towards the Brahmo Samaj, visiting Brahmo leaders and attending many Brahmo programs. The Brahmo Samaj upheld the monotheistic doctrine that God is personal, saguna, but formless, nirakara. Hence, they rejected all form of image worship and they denied the possibility of God incarnating as a human being. Narendra was active in the Brahmo Samaj for a few years until he met Ramakrishna, who singled out Narendra as a person of the highest spiritual caliber, or Ishvarakoti, a spiritually perfect, divinely commissioned soul who takes birth not because of his own past karma, but in order to help others attain salvation. Ramakrishna specifically remarked that Narendra belonged to the realm of the formless absolute, which is why he chose to teach Advaita Vedanta to Naren, even though he taught only bhakti, the path of devotion, to almost everyone else. Despite this teaching, however, Vivekananda retained a core of devotion in his spiritual life, and Ramakrishna himself would inculcate this devotion into Vivekananda. Later in this video, we will discuss the increase in Vivekananda's feelings of devotion and surrender for the goddess Kali towards the end of his life. Medhananda argues that Ramakrishna taught Vivekananda 2 different teachings in 2 stages. In the first stage, from 1882 to early 1884, Ramakrishna taught Narendra traditional Advaita Vedanta, which holds that the soul's ultimate reality is the impersonal, non-dual Brahman, and that the world, the personal God, and the individual souls are all ultimately as unreal as a dream. Under his guru's guidance, Narendra studied Advaitic texts and had several transformative Advaitic spiritual experiences. These experiences of non-dual reality in the form of Nirvikalp Samdhi led him away from his early Brahmo beliefs and towards embracing Advaita Vedanta instead. However, in the second stage, from 1884 up to Ramakrishna's passing away in 1886, Ramakrishna gradually led Narendra to reject the world-negating and quietistic outlook of traditional Advaita Vedanta in favor of a more expansive and ethically oriented Advaitic philosophy, according to which the static, non-dual Brahman is inseparable from the dynamic personal Shakti, which actually manifests as everything in this world. Remember the story about Vivekananda's prayers at the Kali temple, which began this video? This incident would have taken place right at the beginning of the second stage of Ramakrishna's teaching. Vivekananda described his early experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi under the influence of Ramakrishna as follows. One day in the temple garden at Dakshineshwar, Thakur or Ramakrishna touched me. And first of all, I began to see that the houses, rooms, doors, windows, verandas, the trees, the sun, the moon, all were, as it were, dissolving and ultimately merging in the Akasha or the Ether. Gradually again, the Akasha also vanished. And what happened next, I do not recollect. But I do remember that I became frightened and cried out to Thakur, "Ah, what are you doing to me? Don't you know that I have parents at home?" When Thakur heard this, he gave a loud laugh and then touched me again with his hand and said, "All right, let it stop for now." After that, I gradually returned to my normal state and once again saw the houses, doors, windows, verandas, and other things just as they were before. This was Narendra's first glimpse of the Advaitic state of Nirvikalpa Samdhi, during which his mind merged into non-dual Brahman and the world of differentiation began to vanish. After he returned to a normal state of consciousness, Narendra was left feeling bewildered by the experience and was amazed by Ramakrishna's ability to, as he put it, destroy the strong structure of my mind at will. Similarly, on another day, Narendra was ridiculing the Advaitic idea that this jug is God, this cup is God, and we too are God. Immediately, Ramakrishna touched Narendra, who then went into an ecstatic spiritual state that lasted for several days. Vivekananda later described this spiritual experience as follows. That day, my mind underwent a complete revolution at the marvelous touch of the Master. I was stupefied to find that there was really nothing in the universe but God. Everything I saw was God. I sat down to take my meal, but found that everything, the food, the plate, the person who served it, and even myself, was nothing but God. When that first intoxication lessened a bit, the world began to appear to me as a dream. This state of things continued for some days. Analyzing this description, Swami Medhananda makes an interesting point. He highlights that Vivekananda's initial experience was of everything in the world being a real manifestation of God. However, only when the intoxication of the experience lessened a bit, he had the traditional Advaitic experience of everything in the world feeling like a dream. In other words, this single prolonged spiritual experience enabled him to inhabit two distinct non-dual standpoints. First, an integral, all-encompassing non-dual standpoint, closer to Tantra or Kashmir Shaivism. And secondly, a more traditional, world-denying Advaitic experience. Ramakrishna's second and higher teaching to Vivekananda was based on the concept of Vijnana, based on a distinction originally made by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Ramakrishna, in September 1884, told Narendra and other devotees about the difference in spiritual outlooks between a Jnani and a Vijnani. The Jnani says, "This world is a framework of illusion, but he who is beyond knowledge and ignorance describes it as a mansion of mirth. He sees that it is Ishwar, God himself, who has become the universe, all living beings, and the 24 cosmic principles. He alone who, after reaching the Nitya, the eternal reality, can dwell in the Leela, God's cosmic play, and again climb from the Leela to the Nitya, has ripe knowledge and devotion." Sages like Narada cherished love of God after attaining the knowledge of Brahman. This is called Vijnana. The Jnani, according to Ramakrishna, is the traditional practitioner of Advaita Vedanta, who has attained the spiritual realization that the impersonal, non-dual Brahman alone is real and the universe is unreal. But the Vijnani first attains knowledge of Brahman and then achieves the even greater and more comprehensive realization that Brahman has become the universe and its living beings. While both the Jnani and Vijnani are Advaitins, the Jnani only has the realization of non-dual Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, whereas the Vijnani returns from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi back to this world of multiplicity to attain the richer, world-inclusive realization that the same Brahman he had realized in Nirvikalpa Samadhi has also manifested as everything in the universe. Hence, unlike the Jnani, the Vijnani combines knowledge and devotion, Jnana and Bhakti, by worshipping everything and everyone as real manifestations of God. Ramakrishna preferred Vijnana to Jnana and hence wanted his greatest disciple, Narendra, to attain the state of a Vijnani. Ramakrishna likened Jnanis who seek only their own salvation to a hollow piece of driftwood that sinks if even a bird sits on it. By contrast, Vijnanis like the sage Narada, who strive to help others achieve spiritual enlightenment, are like a huge log that not only can float across to the other shore, but can carry many animals and other creatures as well. Here, it can be observed that the emphasis placed on the Vijnani to help in the salvation of others is similar to the ideal of the Bodhisattva in Mahayana Buddhism. And it was only the Vijnana realization of the world being a manifestation of God, which could provide a basis for service towards others within the framework of Karma Yoga. Since God manifests in the form of human beings, it follows that one actually serves God by serving others. Vivekananda, we should recall, described his initial Advaitic experience as the realization that there was really nothing in the universe but God, which corresponds quite closely to Ramakrishna's description of the Vijnani's realization. But Vivekananda's subsequent experience that the world was just a dream corresponds to the traditional Jnani experience of the world as a framework of illusion. Later, on attaining the state of Vijnana, Vivekananda would realize the importance of this state for the ethical ideal of service towards others, which he would enshrine as the central task of his organization, the Ramakrishna Mission. This is what the young Narendra told his friends after listening to Ramakrishna's teachings on Vijnana. What Thakur said today in his ecstatic mood is clear. One can bring Vedanta from the forest to the home and practice it in daily life. People must first fully believe and be convinced that God has manifested himself before them as the world and its creatures. If people consider everyone to be God, how can they consider themselves to be superior to others and harbor attachment, hatred, arrogance, or even compassion towards them? Their minds will become pure as they serve all beings as God, and soon they will experience themselves as part of the blissful God. They will realize that their true nature is pure, illumined, and free. The key to making Vedanta practical in everyday life, Narendra realized, is to recognize that God has manifested himself as the world and its creatures. So, Narendra learned from his guru that the ethical practice of serving all beings as God finds its justification not in traditional Advaita Vedanta, which corresponds to the jnana state of spiritual realization, but in the world-inclusive spirituality of Ramakrishna's Vijnana. In 1886, towards the end of his life, Ramakrishna again encouraged Narendra to be a Vijnani Bhakt, a devotee, instead of a dry, one-sided Jnani or traditional Advaita Vedantin. This is what he said to Narendra. Brahman and Maya. The Jnani rejects Maya. The Bhakta, however, does not ignore Maya. He worships Mahamaya, taking refuge in her. He says, "O Mother, please stand aside from my path. Only if you step out of my way shall I have the knowledge of Brahman." The Jnanis explain away all three states, waking, dream, and deep sleep. But the Bhaktas accept them all. Then Sri Ramakrishna took a pause and said, "The doctrine of Maya is dry." He asked Narendra to repeat what he said. And Narendra repeated, "The doctrine of Maya is dry." Hearing this, Ramakrishna affectionately stroked Narendra's face and hands and said, "Your face and hands show that you are a bhakta, a devotee. But the jnani, the follower of the path of knowledge, has different features. They are dry." At another occasion, Ramakrishna again said about Narendra, "Could one who is a dry jnani have such eyes? Jnana and feminine bhakti are blended in you." Through these utterances, Ramakrishna gradually led Narendra towards the path of devotion. Now, we will discuss how Swami Vivekananda, in his lectures, retained an emphasis on devotion despite his focus on the intellectual path or Jnana Yoga. The influence of Ramakrishna's teachings can be observed in Vivekananda's lectures, which he made in the West as well as in India during the 1890s. In one such lecture, titled "The Sages of India," Vivekananda declared that our religion preaches an impersonal, personal God. What did he mean by this? He meant that unlike the traditional Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankara, which preaches that the personal God is ultimately found to be unreal upon attaining knowledge of the impersonal Brahman, Brahman actually includes the personal God. And hence, the ultimate reality is personal impersonal. In another lecture, Vivekananda explained this idea even further. The impersonal God is a living God, a principle. The difference between personal and impersonal is this, that the personal is only a man, and the impersonal idea is that he is the angel, the man, the animal, and yet something more which we cannot see. Because impersonality includes all personalities, is the sum total of everything in the universe, and infinitely more besides. Vivekananda seems to argue that as impersonality includes all personalities, Brahman must include within it all personal gods. Hence, according to him, the personal gods would not be found to be unreal upon the realization of a Brahman. To view the whole universe as Brahman, according to Vivekananda, would lead to a transformed outlook within the realized soul. This is his description of the realized soul's experience. The whole vision is changed, and instead of an eternal prison, this world has become a playground. Instead of a land of competition, it is a land of bliss, where there is perpetual spring, flowers bloom, and butterflies flit about. Inspired by Ramakrishna's emphasis on him becoming a Vijnani, Vivekananda in his lectures would share that the highest Advaitic realization is not the state of Nirvikalpa Sambhati, in which the world is not perceived, but the world embracing realization that everything is full of the Lord. This was his interpretation of the Upanishadic saying, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. In one passage, Vivekananda also shares a radical consequence of this realization. Instead of championing the traditional goal of liberation or mukti from this transmigratory cycle, he claimed that the fully enlightened soul does not care whether it is born again on earth or finds itself in heaven or hell, since it sees nothing but God everywhere. Hence, it is far nobler to serve others in a spirit of worship than to seek one's salvation alone. And so, he criticized traditional scholars like Shankaracharya for their emphasis on individual liberation, as opposed to helping others achieve collective salvation. This is what he said in a lecture. The Upanishads and the Gita are the true scriptures. Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Chaitanya, Nanak, Kabir, and so on are the true avatars, for their hearts were as infinite as the sky. And above all, Ramakrishna, Ramanuja, Shankara, etc. seem to have been mere pandits with much narrowness of heart. Where is that love, that weeping heart at the sorrow of others, dry pedantry of the pandit, and the feeling of only oneself getting salvation, Hari's Kari? Towards the final years of his life, Vivekananda became an even greater devotee of Kali. This is revealed by a conversation he had with Sister Nivedita in 1899, where he recounted his conversion from being a non-theistic practitioner of Advaita Vedanta towards a devotee of Kali. Vivekananda said, "How I used to hate Kali and all her ways. That was my 6 years' fight because I would not accept Kali." Nivedita: "But now you have accepted her specially, have you not, Swami?" Vivekananda: "I had to. Ramakrishna dedicated me to her, and you know I believe that she guides me in every little thing I do, and just does what she likes with me." Nivedita: "But what made you accept her, Swami? What broke all your opposition down?" Vivekananda: "No, that will die with me. I had great misfortunes at the time, you know. My father died and so on, and she saw her opportunity to make a slave of me. They were her very words, to make a slave of you. And Ramakrishna made me over to her. He only lived 2 years after doing that. Yes, I think there's no doubt that Kali worked up the body of Ramakrishna for her own ends. I cannot but believe that there is, somewhere, a great power that thinks of itself as feminine and called Kali, and the mother." Vivekananda would often tell his intimate friends and disciples, especially towards the end of his life, that he felt himself to be a mere instrument of the Divine Mother. On another occasion, Sister Nivedita remarked that Vivekananda said one day that Ramakrishna, while seeming to be all bhakti, was really within all jnana. But he himself, apparently all jnana, was full of bhakti. In a letter to Sister Christine in 1898, Vivekananda wrote, "Mother knows what is best for us. She will show the way. I am now in bhakti. As I am growing old, bhakti is taking the place of jnana." In 1900, similarly he wrote, "I am mother's child. She works, she plays. Why should I plan? What should I plan? Things came and went just as she liked, without my planning. We are her automata. She is the wire puller." It is telling that this devotion towards Kali only intensified towards the end of his life. When he was younger, under the guidance of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda did not have any experience of Kali despite his efforts to mediate on her. This is demonstrated by a dialogue between the Guru and disciple in 1885. Narendra said, "I have meditated on Kali for 3 or 4 days, but nothing has come of it." Ramakrishna says, "All in good time, my child. Kali is none other than Brahman. That which is Brahman is also Kali. Kali is the primal Shakti. When the divine reality is inactive, Nishkriya, I call it Brahman. And when it creates, preserves and destroys, I call it Shakti or Kali. What you call Brahman, I call Kali. Brahman and Kali are inseparable, They are like fire and its power to burn. If one thinks of fire, one must think of its power to burn. Just so, if one accepts Brahman, one must also accept Kali. This statement by Ramakrishna should be related to the earlier discussion on Jnana and Vijnana. According to Ramakrishna, the Jnani, after realizing the impersonal non-dual Brahman in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, considers both Shakti and the world to be illusory. By contrast, the Vijnani, after attaining the knowledge of the inactive non-dual Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, remains in the world as a devotee, a bhakt, and realizes that Shakti, far from being unreal, is the same ultimate reality in its dynamic aspect, as the omnipotent and loving Lord who creates, preserves, and destroys the universe. So it is the Vijnani who realizes that the personal God of devotees and the impersonal absolute of Jnanis are equally real. In his lifetime, Vivekananda embodied Ramakrishna's vision of Vijnana in his emphasis on seeing God in everything, as well as in his later devotion towards the goddess Kali. What do you think about this interpretation of Vivekananda's teachings? Let us know in the comments below.